Okay, let's jump right into this. Welcome to The Explainer, where we take complex, real-world problems and break them down into insights you can actually use. Today we're unpacking a surprisingly chaotic battle, the dynamics of water damage. Specifically, we're looking at why this invisible enemy is uniquely devastating in the historic, weather-battered city of Boston, and we'll explore the exact, methodical science professionals use to fight back.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, Boston's brutal water profile. Second, 4 common water disasters. Third, the 3-phase restoration process. Fourth, the science of drying. And finally, costs and insurance claims. Let's get started.
Section 1. Boston's brutal water profile.
So what makes Boston so vulnerable? Well, it's kind of like a perfect storm of localized, historical threats layering right on top of each other. Think about the very ground the city sits on. Large chunks of Boston are built on filled tidal flats and shifting clay. When you mix that clay with those severe New England freeze-thaw cycles, the soil actually violently expands and contracts. It literally cracks foundation walls, opening up a direct highway for groundwater. Then, look at the architecture itself. These historic neighborhoods are heavily relying on pre-World War II cast iron plumbing that's just quietly corroding from the inside out. Add in those brutal nor'easters pushing salt air into the city, weakening the mortar joints of old brick row houses, and you've got a recipe for disaster.
And it's not just the materials they used, it's the density of the city. Just think about those iconic triple-decker apartments you see all over Roxbury, Jamaica Plain, and Allston. They literally stack water damage vertically. One person's ceiling leak instantly becomes the floor problem for the unit right below them. Because of this dense urban layout and vertical living, water damage compounds incredibly fast. You aren't just dealing with your own pipes, you're vulnerable to the plumbing of the people living above and beside you.
Moving on to Section 2. 4 common water disasters. When we break down how these buildings actually fail, we see 4 distinct threats. First up, burst pipes. This usually happens from freezing in unheated spaces or just internal corrosion of those old iron lines. Next, basement floods. During the spring thaw, hydrostatic pressure forces groundwater right through those cracked foundations we just talked about, especially if a sump pump decides to fail. Third, roof leaks. What happens here is heat loss melts snow on the roof, it refreezes at the cold edges, and boom, you have an ice dam. That forces the melting water backward, straight under the shingles and down into your wall cavities. And finally, the absolute worst one, sewage backups. Aging city sewer lines just get totally overwhelmed during heavy rain, backing up into basements, particularly in the lower-lying areas of the city.
Now, you might be thinking all water damage is basically the same, right? No way. The industry actually grades the severity by category. On one hand, you have Category 1, which is clean water. This is stuff from a ruptured supply line or rainwater. It's highly damaging to your property, for sure, but it doesn't pose an immediate biological threat. But on the other hand, you have Category 3, also known as black water. This comes from sewage backups or groundwater floods. It is grossly contaminated, highly hazardous to human health, and it requires massive safety protocols just to clean it up.
That brings us to Section 3, the 3-phase restoration process.
So, how do you fix it? Professional restoration goes way beyond just pointing a household fan at a wet wall. Actually, fun fact, doing that just accelerates structural rot. Instead, the pros use a strict 3-phase sequence. Step 1 is emergency mitigation. This is purely about stabilizing the property, shutting off the source, and extracting standing water with industrial pumps. Step 2 is structural drying, which is the actual science of pulling absorbed moisture out of the building materials. And Step 3 is full restoration, where the whole property is finally rebuilt to its pre-loss condition.
This whole sequential process turns into a literal race against the clock. A professional crew aims to dispatch within 60 minutes because every single minute counts. Why? Because within just 24 to 48 hours, mold begins colonizing in Boston's humid environment. If you can extract the water immediately, you transition into the structural drying phase, which safely takes about 3 to 7 days to complete. So speed isn't just about convenience here, it is the only mathematical way to beat mold growth.
Okay, Section 4. The science of drying.
It's kind of incredible to learn that drying out a building is actually a legally recognized science. It's anchored by something called the IICRC S500 standard. This is basically the official playbook. It dictates exactly how to assess damage classes, how to safely handle contaminated water, mathematically place dehumidifiers, and maintain strict documentation. When a certified tech walks into a flooded property, they aren't guessing. They are executing this exact scientific standard. And to execute that standard, they bring in the heavy artillery. We're talking truck-mounted extractors with enough suction to rival a jet engine. But what about the water you can't even see? That's where thermal imaging cameras come in.
They detect the temperature differences caused by evaporating water, literally revealing cold, wet spots hiding right behind historic plaster walls. They verify those spots with penetrating moisture meters that push directly into the wood framing, and once mapped, they deploy low-grain refrigerant dehumidifiers specifically tailored to work in Boston's highly variable temperatures, stripping moisture straight out of the air.
All of that technology, all of that effort is deployed for one single absolutely crucial goal: 15%. I really want you to remember this number. A building material, like a wood floor or a wall stud, is officially considered dry and safe for mold only when its internal moisture content drops below 15%. Until those moisture meters read below that threshold for 3 consecutive days, the drying process cannot stop. It is a strict, measurable finish line.
Finally, Section 5, Costs and Insurance Claims. Let's talk about the financial side. Get a load of this contrast. The average water damage claim in the United States sits around $11,000. But in Boston, that average claim easily spikes to $20,000 or more. So, why the massive markup? It all comes back to the architecture. Boston properties are full of historic, expensive materials. Real hardwood floors, thick plaster walls, intricate trim. When water hits a brownstone or a triple-decker, restoring those dense materials requires specialized structural drawing and really skilled tradespeople, which drastically inflates the bill.
So the crucial point is knowing who's actually going to pick up that bill. Standard insurance policies have a very clear dichotomy. Basically, things that are sudden and accidental are usually covered. Think of a pipe freezing and bursting in the middle of the night, or a sudden roof leak from a massive storm. But then you have what is rarely covered: gradual leaks, damage from maintenance neglect, and crucially, natural groundwater flooding. If hydrostatic pressure pushes groundwater into your basement, your standard policy won't help you at all unless you have a completely separate, dedicated flood insurance policy.
Which brings us to our final thought to leave you with today. What happens if you just try to ignore it? What are the hidden long-term costs of leaving this invisible enemy unchecked? We know it leads to quiet, spreading structural rot, but how deep does that really go into the bones of a historic home? Water damage isn't just a temporary inconvenience, it's a structural emergency. So the next time you hear those pipes rattling on a cold winter night, you'll know exactly what's at stake. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.